recorded. Now, is it seriously, Shauna? Wow, crazy. I guess it's still only April, so only the middle of April. I'm sure we've got a couple more snowfalls to come in Edmonton yet. So the, wow. Yeah, it's a beautiful warm day in Edmonton, so clearly coming out of the mountains, eh? So wow. Okay, I guess we're really lucking out here. So again, I'll emphasize this: if you can turn off whatever whatever you have running in the background, anything at all, it just will make your experience better here. Now, before I get into my stuff, Penny, do you have anything for us?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for taking my phone calls, and we put this together at very short notice. You asked me questions I couldn't answer. I said, trust us and come on the call, and you guys all did, and so I appreciate that very, very much. And first time we've done something like this, any feedback would be appreciated. Kelsey and I are always here to walk through any kinds of administrative questions. Jason, of course, will answer the material questions because you wouldn't want to hear my answers on that. And it was really just nice to touch base with everybody again. And we're going to be doing this more starting forwards, to just be in constant, not constant contact. We don't want to stalk you, but to be in contact with everyone. I had a really nice visit with a lot of you, and certainly with Tom yesterday. So take it away, Jason.
Tom said he felt quite pressured. He said he just did it so that you would leave him alone. So
I'm glad he's honest.
Right. So now I'm going to get Tom in trouble. All right. That's exactly right, Tom. Okay. So we've got yeah, it's an experiment, as everybody knows. I think, am I wrong here? Is there anybody on the call who would not have been writing their CFP exam in, I guess it would be about 5 weeks today, 6 weeks? So I'm interested in this, Shauna. Can you, I don't know, is it that you were just planning to write in the fall anyways? You had a bunch of stuff going on, you knew that, so you didn't bother even booking for this one? Oh, I see. Okay, so if you're, yeah, that's a valid point. Is anybody else still working on PEP right now? Anybody else still in their PEP course? Good stuff, Greg. Yeah, I think you posted some of that, right, on Facebook, if I remember right. Okay. So, but Blair, you have your capstone too, don't you? Don't I have that right, Blair? Am I confusing the issue here? You're completed capstone, aren't you? Am I misremembering? Okay. Yeah, sorry, Blair, I'm not fully clear on where you're at. Oh, I see. And so, oh, so now, hang on a second, Blair. Are you done PEP as well? Okay, Blair, I think that we got to get somebody in touch with you. Because you're not in a course that you should be in then, honestly. This is, so, because we're doing prep here for the CFP exam. If you didn't do the capstone and you didn't do PEP, there's no possible way for you to be writing the CFP exam right now. Okay. So that's, yeah. Mom, could you get an email out to Blair, maybe get Kelsey to reach out to him and see what we can do?
Yeah, Blair, I'll call you right away. So
yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Perfect. That's what I was concerned with here is that, and honestly, I get why it's confusing. All right, thanks, Blair. Appreciate it. Sorry about that. I get why it's confusing. That's exactly why I'm asking the question, because we are, first off, early days still for this PEP thing, and also this cancellation of the exam. I think these factors combined have created some opportunity for confusion. Okay, so where do we sit here? Well, essentially what happened is, and not surprising, and I certainly don't blame FP Canada for this, but of course we know that the exam, the normal June exam rate is canceled. And so I do have this concern now, and I think Penny's right. I think there's a way to integrate this going forward, but with this absence of the normal June exam rate, so I think at least, Ryan, you've got to set priorities there, right? So there's got to be some prioritization. I'll talk about that right away about where, because there's a couple of you in that situation. So the the normal June exam rate is canceled, which leaves this roughly 6 or 7 month gap, depending how we look at it, from maybe your last time studying. And this is what I really didn't want, right? From your last time studying to the exam. Now, many of you will recall my advice about this is that there is nothing more important than just putting in regular study. Okay, you need to be putting in regular study. And what I think is best, and I'm not saying this is best for everybody, but this is what I think is true for the majority of people, is that you're putting in your roughly 30 minutes a day. Okay, so just 30 minutes a day all the way through, all the time. And this is something you should be doing anyways. I think this is true for those who are finished the program. Okay, and that's how you're going to stay current. That to me is what all of us should be doing. I certainly do that, where there's some time every day where we're just getting new content, reading new material, absorbing new stuff, whatever it happens to be. And it might be reading, it might be podcasts. I find lots of good podcasts out there now. It might be YouTube videos, there's some decent YouTube channels, whatever, but you got to find something here that you can do every single day. Now, if you're not sure what to do, I'll give you a couple starting points here. So first off, I'll show you this a little bit later on, and you'll have it in your inbox today too. Yeah, I sure will, Mal. Yeah, I have a slide for that, about that transition and about what's missing for you there. We'll talk about that. Yeah. So our starting points, you've got the 90-day study schedule. Some of you have already used this resource. I am building it out into a 200-day study schedule. I expect to have that sometime late April in people's inboxes. So you can download the 90-day version right now. And yeah, yay, see, Elizabeth, you know, that is a lot of work, honestly. But anyways, you'll have it and you'll have something to do every single day. Or the other thing you can do that gives you 30 minutes a day of stuff to read at least every weekday is follow Jason on Twitter or LinkedIn or Business Career College on Facebook. And you will, on any of those resources, get 3 financial services articles each day. Okay, and not all directly financial planning, but I don't post like politics on here, or I don't post about what I ate or anything like that. It's, yeah, so I want to talk about that, Sean. I'm going to come back to that point. It's a good question, similar to Ryan's question, is what about those of you who are concurrent in PEP and and this class. Okay, so the okay, so we have 3 financial services articles each day. Grab those, that'll get you there. It's Jason Watt BCC on Twitter. I think I can't remember on LinkedIn, Jason Watt CLU maybe on LinkedIn. That sounds right. And Business Career College Corp on Facebook. Don't follow me on Facebook. I'm not that good. I actually hardly post on Facebook at all anymore. The only thing you'll see on there is when my wife tags me on stuff. Okay, so that's good. Okay, and yeah, so for those who have some relationship with PEP, so PEP is the FP Canada Professional Education Program. And IPE is the Introduction to Professional Ethics. So those are both FP Canada courses. Now, IPE is a must. Is there anybody on the call who has not done their IPE? So this is a tiny little course, just 3 hours or thereabouts. You do it in an afternoon, super simple, but it is mandatory prior to writing your CFP exam. Okay. That's good. So you have to get that knocked out. Okay, good stuff, Ryan. So that's the one you have to have. Now the PEP, that's true, Shauna. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, prior to doing, if you're doing the CFP PEP, which is super easy. If that's a challenge, then you probably don't have time to be doing any of this anyways. Is that a fair comment, Shauna? And yeah, that's right. It depends how you pay for it, Craig, but yeah, $200. You can do it for $175 if I remember right, if you bundle it with PEP. I think that's how they structure that. Okay, so the PEP then. So you have to have done either this or capstone prior to writing your CFP exam. So I know a lot of you are in that boat where you've done one or the other courses. If you're doing PEP right now, that's your priority. And yes, I would agree that if you're doing PEP and sort of taking the course seriously, that probably covers your 30 minutes a day. Okay. So yes, I would suggest that's true. And you have to be careful here. You can't just spend all of your time studying, right? My other comment here is that means between the two things, if you're prioritizing, okay, if you really are prioritizing, then you should be prioritizing PEP over this course. Okay, this course is I don't know what we want to call it, a nice to have or a value add, but it's not mandatory, and I think everybody's aware of that. So it's really here just for what I talked about right at the beginning there, is to get everybody closer to being ready for the exam. Now, if you've not done PEP, sign up now. Okay, there is an intake. The May intake is still open, as I understand it. At least it was a couple days ago. Okay, You have to sign up by Friday. And if you do that and stay on schedule, you would be done in time to write CFP in November. Okay. You still could actually start as late as the June intake. I'm not a huge fan of that. If you wait until the June intake, then you will potentially run into deadlines. That is exactly right, Ryan. Yeah. So if you've done capstone or PEP, you're good to go, but everybody has to have done IPE. Yeah. Okay. Unless, and I don't think there's anybody on the call for whom this is true, unless you failed the exam 4 times, in which case then you have to get back at it right from scratch. Okay. Are there any progress questions or path of flow questions or whatever the case is? Okay, that's good. So I have discussed the problem then. We're going to talk about course layout and design right away. We're going to talk about the exam in a few minutes, and I'll show you where you have access to resources this morning as well. So first off, our schedule. Now, I know that there's 2 schedules here, so I think Stacy might be having problems joining. Rose, are you still there? No, you're not. Just bear with me for 1 second here. Oh, there you are, Stacy. Good. Okay. Sorry, Stacy. I'm just going to bring you off mute for a second. I saw. Are you all good, Stacy? You're all sorted out? Oh, I can hear you typing. Good stuff. All right. Thanks. Okay. I put you back on mute. Perfect. Oh, and that's why I keep everybody on mute, because otherwise you hear every time somebody types or when a dog barks or a husband cries in the background or whatever you got. Okay. So the schedule, there's 2 sort of overlapping schedules here. So I just want everybody to acknowledge that you're not missing half the dates when I show the schedule. Really what we have is 2 sort of prep courses running concurrently. And some of this is just about managing my schedule, and some of it is about building in some efficiencies here. And then honestly, it's because for the QAFP, there's not that many people writing QAFP yet. It's going to be a small number. So I did have to build this to be a little bit efficient. So anyways, this is what we're going to be doing over the next 8 months. Okay. So today, we're going to talk about the course itself. We're going to learn about answering constructed response questions. CR is constructed response. And we're going to have a look at the body of knowledge. So we've got some web resources we'll pop over to in a couple of minutes. There will be homework. I will assign homework after every class. Not a ton, should take you less than an hour to do any given bit of homework. But I think it's important to have that homework because that really is going to set the foundation for how we prepare for the exam. Okay. So next time we're together, what we're going to do, and this will be the path for the remaining chunk of the exam, is we will do, generally for the first half, we'll do 1 practice question, and then for the second half, we will do an instructional topic. Okay, that's all good. So that's it. And what I've tried to do here is choose topics that are that fit with the CFP curriculum and stuff that's either been expanded now in the new curriculum or stuff that's not examinable on the QAFP or the old level 1. Although some of it was, honestly, but not to a great extent. Okay. That's good. So that's sort of the intention here, is that we're covering off just CFP type of topics. I have left the very last day of class with an open schedule. So we will be meeting here, if I remember that, yeah, that's the Monday. So nothing scheduled here. We'll fill in the schedule closer to the day. And then your exam, which I know some of you are already registered for. So your exam will be Thursday the 26th. I'm not sure yet how this is going to look. I guess this will depend what's required for social distancing by that point. But I know that FP Canada has lots of time now. I know their exam provider is more than capable of delivering at-home exams. So I would expect, even if we're still in some sort of a quarantine or no large gathering state or whatever it is, that at least there will be the opportunity to write the exam somehow in there. Okay, any schedule questions? And if there's a topic you want covered, if there's something that you know you are weak on in particular, yeah, so I'll show you that, Chris, in a few minutes. Yeah, I do have a slide for that. We'll get there. Yeah, and it's a good question, Chris. It's absolutely an important topic. So the, oh, morning, Gurpreet. All right, I'm going to throw you back on mute there. Okay, so if there's a, and to that point, Chris, that might be something you're thinking about here, is what would I need to review? And that's kind of what I've done here. A good example of this, Chris, something that I think you're more likely to see on the new content versus the old content is pension calculations. So I've deliberately included that here on day 3. This is much more robust now in the new curriculum. So some of my course design here already focuses on this, okay? But yeah, if there's a topic you know you want covered, there's something you know you're weak on, you can ask, and if I can work it into the agenda or if we can do a question that deals with it, perfect. Okay, that's good. All right, now the other agenda, so there's 2 concurrent agendas here. So this one is for both QFP and CFP students. You'll be meeting up, and this is where I've chosen topics, and this is more what you're talking about, Chris, and I think what Al had asked about earlier. This is where I've covered topics that were in the curriculum but have been expanded. Okay, so a couple of examples of this that are significantly expanded from when many of you did your curricula would have been, was behavioral finance or human behavior is a much bigger topic now. Credit worthiness is a much bigger topic now. So those are 2 that I specifically have added here that we will be doing together in class to make sure that you have the opportunity to at least learn some of the basics here, and then to recognize where there still might be gaps that you would need to fill. Okay, we're still not done talking about those differences, but that just gives you an idea here. So here with these courses, we're not going to be doing so many practice questions. We'll do a small amount of multiple choice practice because both exams have a multiple choice component to it. So it's perfectly fine to spend time on that. But this will be mostly about content review. Okay, we'll do most of our practice questions at the other times. Yeah, so it's the same start time, Shauna. whatever. I don't want to say 9 a.m. because that's only true for about a third of the folks on the call. But yes, that's right. It's the same start time. Okay, that's all good. So yes, if you were on at 9 a.m. for that class, then you'll be on at 9 a.m. for this class. Absolutely the same thing. If you were on at 1 o'clock, then you'll be on at 1 o'clock. Okay, I guess noon, right? Noon for those in Newfoundland and Labrador. Okay. Perfect. So yes, same thing, Shauna. We will take a coffee break in about an hour and a half. Okay, 4 hours of me talking is too much for anybody to handle. So we'll take a coffee break here mid-morning always, just a little 15-minute coffee break. And we will wrap up in about 3.5 hours. So you don't have to do any math here. About 3.5 hours from now, class will be done. Okay, so a 4-hour day in total. And I know it's all a little bit of an experiment, and I appreciate everybody coming along for the ride for this experiment. Okay. Yeah, that's we really did think about you, Chris. With only a 4-hour day, it's easier to manage the time zones, right? So even in the worst case scenario for those in Newfoundland, I guess actually technically you're only 3.5 hours out, right? So even in Newfoundland, we're still ending in the workday. Okay. So we've already done our technology check-in. I said hi to everybody. We've made sure our communications worked. I really do encourage the asking of questions. Okay. Please do not feel like if you ask a question, you're somehow interrupting my flow. I've done this before. I know roughly what's coming. You can't take me too far off my path. Okay, so ask a question. When you have the question, it's perfectly fine. And the nice thing with the chat box, if you're asking your questions that way, is I can sort of pick and choose when to answer a question, but I do answer all the questions that show up in the chat box. If I don't answer your question, just re-ask it or come off mute and yell at me or whatever. And you don't have to use the chat box for questions. You're certainly welcome to come off of mute and ask a question. And actually something that I was recently taught on Zoom, which is fantastic, is if you just hold down the space bar, you can say hi. You don't have to manually click yourself off mute. And if you see, you'll see it for a second. If you hold down your space bar, you'll see that you unmute momentarily. It's a push to talk, so you have to hold down the space bar the whole time you're talking. Now, the one exception there is if you're still clicked in the chat box, then you'll just make a space bar in the chat box. So you have to click somewhere else other than the chat box for that function to work. Yeah, perfect. I see some of you cycling through that right now. That's good. But it is a real easy way to ask sort of a 10-second or less question. Okay, we're going to pop over to Moodle in a moment, and I will show you the resources that are available on Moodle. And I want to set an expectation right now, okay? And really 2 sets of expectations. So the first is, okay, that you do the homework. Okay, and I'm going to talk about bias in a moment here and why I think this is so important. So first thing is that you do the homework. And the second thing is that you are willing to share in class. Now, we've got a huge class here. We've got 35 students on the call right now, 34 students on the call right now, sorry. And with 34 of you here, it may be the case that not everybody gets an opportunity to share, but I'm going to do everything I can to optimize the sharing. And when I say sharing, here's what I mean. So we're just going to take a brief look at what happens with this exam, and you'll see this as we work through the course. But one of the major problems with writing constructed response questions, it happens with multiple choice too, but it's less obvious with constructed response. So you write the question. So you read the question and you answer the question. Now, when you do this, it's unavoidable. We all have bias. I have it, you have it, people who study bias professionally have it. We all have bias. And what's going to happen here is you apply your bias to your reading and answering. Okay, that's good. You can let me know if you don't have any biases. I'm interested to hear if anybody doesn't have bias. And then what happens is if you have the, yeah, that's true, Craig, right? There's, although you're going to apply even your bias flavors how you learn, right? And how you apply that learned knowledge. But it's true, it's a true story that there's benefit to having seen something or experienced something and developing out that way. Nevertheless, that does create bias, right? So if you have the answer provided, so you do a constructed response question, you have the answer provided, well, what happens here is you almost certainly apply the same bias to your interpretation of your answers. Okay, so basically what I've done here, if we can use a term from behavioral finance, is I built a frame. Okay, that's not a frame. I built a frame and everything is going to happen within that frame. Okay, is everybody with me there? So what has to happen is we have to take active steps to not expose ourselves to our own bias. And left to your own devices, you're going to always be having to deal with that bias. Very difficult to get out of it. And this is why I ask you to share your answers. Because when you share an answer to a question, sorry, Zoom's been focusing on security issues and has ignored another technical glitch that has arisen. So sharing an answer to a question, what's going to happen then is the rest of the class reads your solutions, goes through it, and we're going to see this not this week, but next week or next class when we're together, is that gives you the chance to get your bias identified. Okay. And it's a difficult thing. It's a little bit of a painful process because what's really happening here is your framework, your understanding of the world, which is really what this is for the purpose of any question, you've built a little world for it, that's being disrupted. Okay, that's a painful thing. However, that's necessary because what we want to do is get to the exam. Yeah, that's what I'm shooting for here, Craig, right? I want to get to the exam with some tools to work through or work around my own bias, and with the recognition of where my bias might hurt me. Okay, now there are other things that you can do. Okay, you have other tools available. And as an example here, well, that is a tool, but what I would suggest here is something that's quite useful is to partner up with somebody else on the course and exchange your assignments. This is the nice thing about doing this class over such a very long period of time is you'll have ample time to do this. So what I would suggest here is each of you does the case study, the constructed response question, and then you send it to each other. You get somebody else to grade. And that way, you're not applying your bias to your grading. Okay. Is everybody with me there? And you're going to hear me talk about this concept of bias extensively through the course. So I know there's a big group of you, for example, from service in, I think everybody in the service group is in Northern Alberta, but that service crew, maybe you can find somebody else to partner up with. I think a couple of you will recognize other names on the call. So if you've got somebody else from your firm that you can partner up with, or somebody local to you. So Patty, I don't know where you are, sorry, but yeah, that's, so you can exchange email addresses or whatever the case is. You can use the chat box to do it. I'll show you in a couple of minutes. You can use the discussion forum to partner up. Okay. I guess it doesn't matter so much if you're local now. We can't go see each other anyways, right? But that's traditionally what I've done is partnered people up with somebody local, but just find somebody to exchange with. And what you're going to find too is grading somebody else's assignment is a very useful exercise. Okay. There's quite a few, Shauna. There's about a dozen or so. If the service folks want to partner up, maybe you could send, I'm not sure, either Troy or, oh, help me out here. I've lost his name. Anyways, yeah, now I'm not sharing people's email addresses, Paul, right? So I'm not sending out an email with everybody's email addresses on it. Okay, that's, but yeah, okay. Thanks, Mom, that's good. Okay, yeah. So yeah, so maybe Paul, you can reach out to Sabu, sorry, that's what I was looking for, Sabu or Troy, and get one of them to send the whole group an email. Okay. All right, that's good. I'm not sure who everybody on the call deals with, but one of the two, and ask that way. You can set up little study cohorts or whatever the case is. Okay, are there any questions about the course design? We're going to pop over to the learning management system in a moment here and have a look at this as well. Okay. Now, in order to access the Business Career College study resources, you're going to go to bcceducation.com. Now, my interface looks a little bit different than yours, just how I have everything set up. But anyways, you just log in here, and then once you're logged in, over in the top right, you'll see a little link to access your study resources. And when you go to access your study resources, it will bring you to a page that looks roughly like this. Okay, it's moodle.businesscareercollege.com. So you'll log in here. Okay, and once you're logged in, then you will, and that's a safe link. I just posted that link up there. So you'll log in and then you'll see a bunch of study resources. There are two courses that I would like you to pay attention to. The first is CFP exam prep. So you won't have as many courses as I do, but you'll see a course called CFP exam prep. That's what we're doing. we're in the middle of CFP exam prep. And so you'll click on that course, and that will take you into the resources that we're using. So first off, you can go to the discussion forum. So if you're looking for somebody to partner up with, you can just go post here and you can post, or if you have questions, like Chris here posted a question, and then I will answer those questions. So, and it's actually nice, you can see what kinds of questions people ask, but you can also post here if you're looking for a, somewhere in here, there's people that have actually posted looking for study buddies, but whatever. You can see that people do post questions. It's a good place to ask if you're sort of midway through the month and you just have a question, you say, well, it's 2 weeks till class, I want to know. Okay. I think, Bam, you're just trying out the link there. All right, I think Bam's just trying out the link. Okay, so the discussion forum, and then you've got supporting resources. This is a bunch of miscellaneous stuff that I put together, and links to various resources. I'm going to show you some of these right away. The 90-day study schedule. It's in here somewhere. I just can't see it. But anyways, just a bunch of odds and ends that you can play around with if you're looking for any background notes or whatever the case is. Oh, I will show in here because there's a bunch of you that don't have a strong insurance background. So I do have a little study tool. This insurance crib notes is a good document for people who may not have a good insurance background. So if you come from the banking world and you did all your courses with CSI or whatever the case is, then the insurance crib notes document is, I would suggest, quite useful for you. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to show that in a couple of minutes, Michelle. Yeah. Okay. And then we just scroll down from here. So yeah, this is not this note complete before day one. I hope nobody did that. That's a lot of work. But anyways, that's from an old version of the class. I should hide that note. Anyways, what you'll see here is a full-on mock-up of the CFP exam. So some of you have done this already. I am working on some new questions, but this is really what the exam looks like. Okay, about 5 or 6 case study questions in the morning with a multiple choice component, and then about 5 or 6 case study questions in the afternoon with another multiple choice component. Okay, and there are 2 sets of that exam. Oh, I see what we got you going on here. Okay, so solutions and the questions are separate. Sorry, I didn't realize what Kelly had done for the layout. I like it, but I didn't notice it before. So this is really what you're going to have for your CFP exam. So first off, it's all computer-based. You do get a booklet with the case studies in it. So if you're looking to duplicate that, what you can do is you can print off the cases here. Now, what I would suggest is that you get used to answering on the computer. So print off the case studies, but answer on your keyboard. And there are a couple reasons why, in fact, 3 reasons why I'm going to suggest that this is the right thing to do. First off, it's closest to your exam experience. That's what you're doing on exam day. That's what you should be doing to prepare for the exam. Second, it forces you to more fully put together your thoughts. I find sometimes when we write out the answer, so writing the answer for ourselves creates kind of lazy answers. Okay, and I see that all the time where people share their written work and they say, yeah, I knew it, but I was just writing it out real quick. Okay, well, don't do that. That's not good practice for the exam. Okay, whereas typing the answer, you're generally going to have a more not necessarily fuller answer, but rather an answer that's closer to what you would do on the exam. And then the last is it's easier for sharing in class. If you're going to have a study partner or you're going to share this in class, it's much easier, especially for those of us with questionable handwriting. Nobody wants to read your bad handwriting. Okay. Now the actual exam layout is just like you see here. So the exam layout is going to be 2 3-hour sessions, and it is 2 separate sessions. So it's an AM session and a PM session. So in the AM, you're going to have 5 or 6 cases, and then somewhere between 7 to 12 multiple choice questions. The multiple choice are all standalone. They don't tie into the case studies. The cases, okay, the cases are all about 2 to 3 questions each. And I will show you one of these. We're going to work through one of these together after the coffee break this morning. And get a feel for what one of these questions looks like. And then what'll happen at the AM, when the AM session ends, you hand it all in, never to see it again. So when you're done in the morning, that's it, it's over. Okay. And then the afternoon session, it's the same thing again. 5 or 6 more multiple choice, or sorry, 5 or 6 more case studies, 2 or 3 questions each, 7 to 12 multiple choice. And we're going to talk about time management as soon as we see that first question this morning. This exam, and those that have written the exam, I think will vouch for this. This exam is very much a struggle in time management. That be a fair comment? Previous exam writers, that's it, Olu, right? Okay. Yeah, I hardly talk to anybody. In fact, I don't think I've ever talked to a single person who said they felt like they had enough time in both the morning and afternoon session. And that's true for people who passed the exam and for people who failed the exam. Okay, it doesn't seem to matter that time management is a challenge. So we will be focusing on that right from the first time we look at a question together. Okay. So you have 2 full sets of questions here, or 2 full sets of exams you can work through. There's first exam, second exam, and there's multiple choice to go along with it, solutions, all that good stuff. Okay, so that's the first exam, and the second exam is just below that. So again, you play around here, you'll get the hang of it pretty quick of how the course flows. So there's mock exam 1, mock exam 2. Okay, and you can do those to your heart's content. Okay, you can write those up. You can sit down and actually schedule yourself a practice session. You block aside a full Friday or whatever and you say, I am just going to sit for 2 3-hour sessions and write the whole thing. I'm going to see how it goes. Okay, it's not a bad idea, not a bad way to spend a day, although it might be a little early to think about that right now. Maybe you want to leave that until closer to the exam, or maybe you want to do it right now. Okay, that's good. And then I'm posting up here. Where is it? Sorry. Right. Sorry, webinar recordings. So in the webinar recordings, I have a couple of things here. First, you'll see the spring and summer extended prep. Let me just make this a little easier to read. There. Okay. So spring and summer prep, that's where today's session is posted. So we have right now, this is the blank PowerPoint deck, and I always post this up before class. And I know some people like to go and download it and use that to take their notes within it. And then we're going to work through this question. This is one of the questions from exam 2. We'll be working through this question today. Okay. And then I'm going to also be posting a new question. It'll be there by Monday. It's not done yet, but I have a question in progress that will be posted here. And please download it and do this for next class. Okay, I'll try and have them. In fact, I will have them. It's not I'll try. I'll have them ready in advance of class normally, but this whole class has been a little bit of a fastball for me. So that case study won't be done until Monday, and it'll be posted there. Yeah, it's literally, I mean, I can bring it up for you, Shauna. It's literally a blank PowerPoint deck. It's the PowerPoint slides that you've already seen. I don't know if it's actually going to work because I'll have the same slide deck open twice, but I think it will. It just looks like that. Okay. So, okay, and I don't agree with that, Olu, right? You know that I take a different perspective on this. It's not a question of what FP Canada is looking for, right? Okay. Every question has objectively right answers, and that's what we want to work towards, is getting an understanding that every question does have objectively right answers. Okay. And I find the problem with the perspective that you're taking here, and I know this happens sometimes when you feel like the exam is sort of stacked against you, but the problem here is this causes people to look for things that aren't there, or to think that they're deliberately being tricked or some version of that. The exam is plenty difficult just on its own merits, and it's actually not that hard to write difficult questions that still have objectively right answers. So yeah, sometimes I know the exam gets into people's heads, and there'll be a few people on the call who are in that position now where you're thinking that somehow what FP Canada is looking for is something different from correct financial planning practice. And that's not the case. The exam does test correct financial planning practice. Now, the exam does sometimes get into very complicated areas and unconventional scenarios, and you have to be prepared for that. That's true. Okay. Yeah, definitely, Olu, read the question is something that we're going to practice here. 100%. Yeah. Okay. Read the fabulous question, just so people don't think Olu is swearing here, right? Okay. So all right. Yeah, and I would suggest, Chris, that that's mostly self-inflicted. Okay, that we do it to ourselves. Okay, I do not believe that the exam is written to mess with people. Um, I believe most of what happens is we are the victims of our own thinking about things, of our own overthinking sometimes. Again, very easy to put somebody into a sort of high pressure situation, put scenarios that they would have no problem with on a regular day in front of them, and just watch people run in circles. Okay. It's unfortunately, this is human nature, and we do have to learn to get around that. That's part of why I talked about bias earlier, Chris, right? Just to deal with those bias issues. Okay. Now, there are some other resources you'll see in here. So at the end of the day, in addition to what you see here, you will also see the recordings and screenshots. So when we're done, because I don't have a time machine, I can't do this before class, but when we're done, I will also post up the recordings and screenshots for that day's class. And you can see some examples of that. Just scroll down a little bit. So when I taught this course in November of 2019, the last time I taught it, here's exactly what happens. You have the recordings, just a link to unlisted videos on YouTube. So nobody goes and Googles these videos and finds them. So a link to unlisted YouTube videos, and you can watch the recordings. And then the screenshots as well as the chat transcript, because you need the chat transcript. It doesn't show up in the recordings otherwise, but you'll see that I save every screen that I do. So it takes a second. There we go. And we're going to see, this is the last time I taught the class. You'll see that a lot of the stuff in here looks very similar to what we'll do in class today. Okay, that's good. So see, we did that already. A lot of this we're going to do in later classes. I have a little more time with this group, so it's nice. Okay, now if you're looking for all of our resources, if there's some topic you know you want to study, you do have access to that. You can go back to the dashboard. You can click on the logo at the top left here, or you can click on the little dashboard on the nav bar I just showed you. And you will see a class called Content Review. So this class is really just all the stuff that a student going through the core or advanced curriculum does. Okay. And it just shows whatever you want to look up. It's all here. If you want to go and read about whatever, structure and taxation of business entities, there it is. There's the textbook. You can crack that thing open. If you want to practice the quizzes to get some multiple choice practice in, you can do that. Okay. So all this stuff that a student in core would go through, you can go and play around with it to your heart's content. Okay, that's good. And advanced curriculum will be posted up soon. It's all completed. I think Kelly just has to get it moved over there. Okay, Shelley, do you see where that is? A couple of you asked that question, but I know you specifically did, Vashali. So you have access to the full curriculum. It's all there. You navigate around a little bit, you'll get the hang of it. There's a little intro video when you get there to show you how to use it. Okay. Perfect. Now, while we're over here at the internet, we're going to have a look at some resources that FP Canada provides. This first is one we're going to have a look at again when we're closer to exam day. It's the Guide to Examinations. I expect there will be some changes to this document by the time you're writing. I think we're going to find some of the COVID-19 protocols. We'll change some of what's in here. I just want to point out that there is a document that sort of explains what you're up against with the exam. I know some of you have never written an exam with FP Canada. If you're in that situation, if you didn't have to write your level 1 or QAFP exam, or you're writing this exam for the first time, then I would suggest it is worth reading this. One thing I will point out right now is just your calculator. So is anybody using a calculator that doesn't look like any of these? Got the two Casios, you got the, there's really about 5 different versions of this HP floating around. There's one more version of the Sharp that's either red and black or black and red, or black on black in a version of it, depends when it was printed, I guess. And the Texas Instruments, and there's a couple different versions of the Texas Instruments. Mine is the white buttons on a black background, but it's still the same calculator, the TIBA2 Plus. Okay. Nobody's using an unfamiliar calculator. Nobody's going to try and bring their cell phone calculator into the exam with them or anything like that. No scientific calculators. Technically, Kevin, you're not. Technically, the rule is only one calculator. I know some exam centers do allow it, but you shouldn't count on it. What you should do is bring a spare set of batteries for whatever calculator you're using. And depending which calculator it is, if you're using the TI BA2 Plus, the one on the left here, what you should do is go buy a new set of batteries before you write, change the batteries, and then bring the old batteries and your instrument screwdriver into the exam with you. That you're allowed to do. And then if your batteries die, you're good. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, Craig. Yeah. Now, your proctor might have allowed you to go fetch that calculator if yours died. So that's fine. But yeah, technically the rules do not allow 2 calculators in the room. And I know some people like to have one of those like cheap Staples calculators so they can just do add, subtract, multiply, divide. And technically that's not allowed either. Okay, that's all good. We'll go through this document again closer to exam day. There's a bunch of stuff in here that is useful, but will be more useful closer to the exam day. Now, what I do want to show you here is that FP Canada puts together a document to help you understand what is going to be tested here, at least to some extent. So this document, the exam blueprint, and you can find this in your exam toolkit. If you log into the FP Canada site, you'll see that you have something called the exam blueprint. Okay, and it takes you right here to this document. I'm going to point something out. So a couple of you asked already about differences between this exam and the last exam, or the old versions of the exam. And right here, there's a massive difference that I think will go underappreciated in many cases. So it's always been the case that the exam has a sort of ethics component to it. Okay. Now, ethics questions on this exam are not going to be rules-based. So what would not be a good ethics question, and FP Canada won't ask this kind of thing, is they're not going to ask you which rule did John break in this scenario. Okay, so they won't have that kind of thing where it's very sort of memory based. Instead, what it will be is maybe with a multiple choice question. And I'll show you examples of this with constructed response later on. But instead, a multiple choice question will have two answers that are ethics violations. So, for example, you might have a capacity problem. So you have a client who demonstrates a capacity issue, and you have an answer that says, email the client's child and describe your conversation with that client. And what's the problem with that answer? Yeah, that would be a violation of confidentiality. You wouldn't do that unless you had explicit consent from the client previously to do that. I know some of you are using trusted contact person processes, but with no prior consent, this would be a confidentiality violation, but it will be presented as one of the possible choices. So is everybody with me there? Do you see how they're testing this? So it's not so much that it's what on this list is unethical. It's here's a list of options for you, and a couple of them happen to be unethical. And we will do some questions like this. This is something that absolutely we're going to work through. Okay, now, I would never suggest there's a situation where a trusted contact person replaces a power of attorney. Once you have a power of attorney, that's the attorney is it. Yeah. Now I mentioned the distinction here between the old version of the exam and the new version exam. This used to be 6% of the exam. Okay, so it's now 12% of the exam. And for those of you who are rewriting, this is a change. This means many more questions that will present you with these sort of ethical dilemmas. Okay? And I think you could make an argument that any constructed response question does a little bit of this anyways. Okay. Is that all good? Okay, now the other thing that's useful on this page, we just talked about the layout. I told you that it's mostly constructed response, but there'll be a small portion of multiple choice. And actually, I think that they sort of adjusted this after the fact. So this is more multiple choice now. This used to say, I think it used to say 15 to 25%. So there's a little bit more multiple choice now on the CFP exam than there used to be. Okay. Okay, and then complexity. Now, complexity should not be confused for difficulty. Some of you actually, if you live in a more complex environment, if you regularly deal with business owner or estate planning scenarios, then complexity is probably comfortable for you. So don't confuse complexity with difficulty. Nevertheless, with this exam, you're going to have about half the exam that shows up in that high complexity area. And what high complexity generally means is just lots of moving parts. So this will often mean there's a tax element, there's maybe an estate element to the question. You might have to do some calculations and then apply those calculations. Okay, something like that. Okay, so that's different for those of you who did write the level 1 exam. That's a little bit different. And then FP Canada loves their infographics, and the right-hand 2 infographics are okay. The left-hand one is where I want to focus in a little bit. So FP Canada breaks financial planning for the exam anyways into 3 sets of functions. The first is collection. Collection forms a very small part of this exam, about a quarter. And collection primarily relates to just understanding the client's situation. And then recommendation. So recommendation is where, based on having done collection and analysis, now I make a recommendation. Okay, now I'm going to pick on most of you, maybe all of you, on the call for a moment here. And part of this is to make a point. So tell me if this is about right. You're sitting down with a new client for the first time. And you've gone through maybe 25 or 30 minutes of conversation with that client. And by the time you're about 25 or 30 minutes into that conversation with that client, you already have in your head 2 or 3 things that you think that that client can do that will make their financial life better. Tom is with me here. Sean is with me. Tracy and Mal. Okay. Yeah, now there's reason for that, isn't there? I'm going to assume for many of you, and I don't want to say that's wrong necessarily, Craig, but I'm going to say it's not helpful for this exam. That's really where I want to go with this, because I get that that's necessary. And it happens because you see clients all the time who look like each other. Is that a fair comment? So Craig, I'm going to guess that you have maybe 4 or 5 kind of typical client profiles. And because you build a lot of your business, I'm assuming on referrals, people who are going to refer them to other people like themselves, right? That's it, right? Mal, you probably never have a client who has a $2.5 million piece of real estate in downtown Toronto that they have to deal with. Is that fair? Okay, not very often, right? So you might have people with a $2.5 million piece of real estate, but if they do, it's a few sections of land, right? So, and those are 2 completely different scenarios. So when you have that client with a few sections of land, Mal, there's a few things you know, right? You probably, early in any conversation with any farmer like that, are already thinking about estate planning issues. You're probably already thinking about estate equalization. You're probably already wondering who their tax accountant is. Would I have that right? Okay. And you really have, I would suggest, a good chunk of that client picture in your head right from the beginning. And it's just the nature of how we build our businesses. And I don't want to sound critical of that. Okay. I think that's absolutely necessary. If every time I sat down with a client, I had to spend 5 or 6 hours going through a detailed analysis of their situation. Now, how much time do I have to actually operate a business? Okay, it's just not viable, right? I get that. Okay. In that sense, though, the exam does something that we're just not used to. Okay. So, what's really going to happen here is at collection, I mean, that's a solution, Tom. That's part of what you do, right? You multiply your time by having an associate or two. Okay. But even with the associate, Tom, still you want to get to the point where your associate is very comfortable with your kind of, your normal 4 or 5 clients, right? Is that fair? Yeah, that's it, right? So the problem here is that on the exam, you will have unfamiliar scenarios. Okay. So, Mal, you might have that person who has a bunch of real estate in a major metropolitan area. And that's a lot different than your farming client. Or those of you who deal only in high net worth markets, you might find somebody making $35,000 a year who's looking to just optimize their guaranteed income supplement. Okay. I'm going to guess that for some of you who are at Service, you see some of that. Anybody at Service have a discussion recently with a client who's near retirement but doesn't have enough assets? That's I don't want to say a common, but that's a scenario we see with credit union financial planners, isn't it? It's part of the appeal of the credit union. So what you're going to get on the exam is unfamiliar scenarios. And the problem here then is with that unfamiliar scenario, it requires that you do some analysis. Okay. And then, yeah, that's a really good point, Sue. It's just the breadth of different scenarios, right? Okay. So this requires you to do this analysis in order that you're providing good recommendations. The recommendations can't be influenced by your bias. The recommendation has to be appropriate to the client. Okay, so as we're working through this course together, this is exactly where we're going to put in our time. Is on the analysis portions. Okay, that's what has to get stronger for almost everybody. And I have some statistical evidence for this that I'll provide for you in a couple of minutes. Okay, that's all good. Okay, now over on the right-hand side, top right, you see the areas that are most heavily tested. And I will just point out that it's a pretty even distribution, but they do give more weight. And this is new. This is not what this used to look like. More weight to estate planning and legal aspects. And one thing I want to point out as being an area that was not tested or is no longer examinable on the QAFP exam is the family law components. And I believe that your now going to be likely to see a disproportionate amount of family law, or probably at least one family law question on the exam. And in fact, the exam question, the one that you'll have for homework, has a family law component to it. Okay, is everybody with me there? Yeah, so what's changed here on the estate side, Tom, is a little bit more focus on the specific handling of registered plans at death. That's an area that's expanded a little bit. So now you're more likely to see a pension or RSP question at death. Although that was all examinable before. That's an area that's a little bit expanded, but most of the expansion here shows up in that family law section. Okay. Good. Does everybody understand my comments about analysis? Is this a fair comment? Is it useful? If people are confused by this, I would appreciate a question, or if this is different from what you expect, a question here would be helpful. Okay. That's my goal, Shauna. That's correct. Yeah, is to concentrate on things that I would suggest don't fit into your day-to-day. Okay. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, Shauna. Okay, good, good. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is maybe not something that people want to play around with a whole lot, but for those who came through the old program, and you're wondering, so this is more, I don't know if I would read this thing from scratch, okay? But let's say, yeah, you can ask as many questions as you want, Shauna. I appreciate questions. You can come off mute. Remember, you can just hold down the space bar and ask your question. But click outside the chat box to do it. Are you asking if me knowing your demographic helps? Is that what you mean? I'm pretty aware, Shauna, of who's who on the call, if that makes sense. I know I don't know every single person, but I see the list of who's in the class. I can see area codes and what firm you're at, and generally that's enough. Now, that being said, Shauna, and remember I said before, if you have a particular thing that you know you want done, okay? Yeah, and I know there's some folks like that. I think that there's probably a half dozen of you that are in that situation on the call, right? Yeah, I think that's Olu too, right? Oh, you're answering Rose, aren't you, Olu? I got you. Okay, but Olu's very much the same thing, Shauna. He has clients in rural Manitoba and in, where'd you end up, Olu? Right in the GTA, right? I couldn't remember where in the GTA ended up. Are you Aurora? Anyways, whatever it is, okay? So yeah, absolutely, Shauna. That it's a fair point, but it's really, if you know there's something that you want reviewed, you let me know and we'll get that. But yeah, it's and I don't want to. I'm doing what I've accused you of doing now, Shauna. Do you see that? I'm going to jump to some conclusions here. You with me? Okay. So just to show an example of how you could use the body of knowledge. Um, so who just asked about estate plan or the estate on the exam? Sorry, Tom, I appreciate that, Tom. And you might pop into the body of knowledge and look at maybe law, for example. Now, there's no specific estate concept in here, but we're going to pop open the law chapter, and we'll look at foundations of estate. Let's look at estate succession. So look at estate succession issues, and or will you just ask your question about powers of attorney? So I can see what the breakdown is. Now, in this document, you've got two sets of checkboxes here. The left-hand side is for QAFP and CFP. The right-hand side is CFP only. You're tested on both of those chunks of content. And it's not even necessarily accurate to say that what's on the right is what's new. Okay, I have a slide later on, though, where I'll show you that. So I say, well, I want to know what I'm going to be tested on. What's on the exam in terms of probate? And I can pop in here, and I have a very descriptive document about what is likely to, or how something's likely to be tested. And this document, yeah, so I don't like the case studies, Elizabeth. I do not. I am not a fan of the case studies here. Okay. I have found the exact same thing. And it's really a matter of they just don't have enough staff to update them. The guy that wrote them is no longer at FP Canada. So you're kind of left with that resource sitting there in limbo. Nevertheless, this document is useful. So I'll show you the case studies Elizabeth is talking about. That's not what I want to point out here. So this document says I have these action words. This is anybody with an education background, former teachers on the call. So this is Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. It's just a way to categorize concepts. And it says, look, you have to be able to identify the probate fee schedule for a jurisdiction. Now, that's something that's new. Okay. Some of you might recall when, if you went through any sort of prep with me for level 1, or sorry, prior to these changes, so pre-body of knowledge, there were no provincial differences tested. However, now you actually can be tested on provincial differences. Now, that being said, this is not a memorized item. That word identify, if I look at Bloom's taxonomy as a sort of gradation of concepts, I work my way from define through to interpret. Well, I really just have to be able to identify that fee schedule. So I should know, for example, the difference between a province like Alberta with a flat probate fee schedule versus almost every other province, in fact, it's only other territories that have this, versus provinces with a graduated schedule. So that kind of thing would now be on that list. There's a little bit of provincial variation that now shows up in there. Okay. That's good. So this document is useful when I get to the point of saying, what do I have to know for the exam? Okay. But I would not use this as a starting point for your studies. Okay, instead use the 90-day study schedule. That's what it's for. Or you can use the textbook itself. But if you're going through the textbook and you say, how much of this do I really have to know? Pop over to the body of knowledge and it can help address that question. Okay. Now, as Elizabeth points out, there are some case studies here. And the case studies are a little bit frustrating. I really think the case studies were written for somebody who's never been in practice. So that's, I think, maybe, Elizabeth, why you find them frustrating. It's almost like they were written for somebody who has never encountered a financial planning client. And with many of them, what I've found is they are completely artificial in terms of timelines. You've got financial planners dealing with like 5 ethical challenges in one day in here, stuff like that. So a little tough. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the case studies either, but they're there. I just don't know if I would use them a lot. Okay, I'm glad you brought them up though. That's good. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, so Sue, those exam results are not particularly useful, okay? Now, that being said, Sue, if you want to email me your exam results, because there's lots of people on the call writing for the second time, and it doesn't really matter whose results I get. Please don't send me 100 results. But Sue, do you want to email me your results? And we can go through them next class. There is some utility in going through them, but not much. And I do agree with you, Sue, that they're a tough tool to use well. Okay. Is that fair? All right. If you're expecting some miracle breakthrough from looking at those, you're not going to get it. Okay. Yes, you're not losing your mind. You didn't miss something when you're reading them. Okay. So a couple of items here related to the exam. The question that several of you have asked already is what differs from old core or the old curriculum to the new curriculum. Okay. So I've tried to give a little bit of a reference here to help you with this. You will find it's, yeah, he knows that, Olu. He learned that from me. All right. Yeah. And he said you were really good at EPC too. He liked having you there. So anyways, the defined benefit calculations, lots more chance of having a time value of money problem here. What wouldn't surprise me at all would be to have a commuted value question or a pension buyback question. Okay, those are both, I think, strong possibilities for this exam. And that's stuff that really wasn't even examinable before. And those are both good financial planning topics, aren't they? Who on the call has had one of those 2 questions in the last year or so? Yeah, and Craig, they are sort of meaty financial planning problems, aren't they? That exact working on it, Mal, right? That's a good way to put it because it's not a 10-minute problem. Okay. And there's a math component and an investment component and a tax component and a massive behavioral component and a huge uncertainty component to it. It's such a good sort of foundational financial planning problem. Okay. If you've never done one, if you say, what is Jason talking about? Perfect. Go to chapter 5 of Advanced Curriculum and give it a read. Okay. It will help you. Credit and borrowing, especially for the non-banking folks. If you have no banking background, this is much larger. So yeah, you would never, so because calculating the commuted value is an actuarial job, Kevin, right? So the question is going to be, and I don't think that's straightforward then, the question is going to give you the commuted value and then ask you to work through with the client whether they should take that commuted value or take the pension. Okay. All right. That's good. It's not even CFA. Well, although you do the math in CFA for it, right? Because you do Black-Scholes in CFA, but yeah. All right. Yeah, exactly, Craig. And that could just be part of a bigger question. Okay. And in fact, that question, I have that very question in one of the exam 2 questions, right? Where you're given the taxable amounts and expected to work through it. Okay. Human behavior. And this is probably useful for everybody. There is a substantial amount more human behavior stuff. If you don't read chapter 16, you are going to end up complaining about an unfair question on the exam. Okay, and what do I mean by this? Well, you'll have a question on the exam where you're expected to know what roll with resistance means, or a question on the exam where you're expected to give an answer that demonstrates good interview technique. And we're going to do some of this in class later on. Okay. So whichever, yeah, so Shauna, not everybody went through Advocacy. Some went through core with me, some went through core with CSI, some went through core with CIFP. But yes, everybody learned the same base content. So yeah, it might have been any of those, excuse me, any of those providers. Or it might have been at one of the point, might have been at NATE or George Brown or BCIT or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So yes, you didn't do a robust commuted value case study in your Advocacy curriculum, Shauna. Is that a fair comment? There would have been a mention there that you can commute a pension, but really not much beyond that. Okay. So if that's if it's something you've done a ton of, yeah, maybe you don't have to worry about it too much. But if it's something that you haven't done a lot of, that's a good use of your study effort. Okay. And family law is significantly more robust. I already mentioned this. So that's sort of my starting point. If you're looking for things to study, you grab those topics. Those are all useful. Okay, and we already did the guide to examinations and the blueprint. All right. Now, here is exactly what I am demonstrating. I said I had some statistics to drive home this concept around analysis and where analysis fits. Okay, so this is our level 1. This is the last time there was a level 1 exam. So November 2019. These are candidates that did core curriculum with me and then went on to their level 1 exam. Okay, and These are folks who generally just learned the technical material. And you can see exactly this, that on this little bar graph, these students scored substantially lower. And so these are mostly practitioners. Almost all of my students are practitioners doing the same thing that most of you do day in and day out. And we had people essentially show up with an analysis gap. Okay, that's what I talked about before. Now, on the level 1 exam, that doesn't hurt you so badly. Okay, and what happens then is I get students who do capstone. Now, there's no more capstone. It's now been replaced with PEP. And now I spend more time on this in my core curriculum. But the same exam time frame, so November 2019 again, the CFP exam, where I have really spent a lot of time with students going through how to conduct a proper analysis. And you can see the payoff here that compared to all other exam writers, BCC students did very well on analysis. Still not as good as they did on collection, but still did very well on analysis. And that's what I'm intending to do. I'm trying to get the same result with you over the next 8 months or the next 7 months, I guess. So we're not going to do capstone here. I know some of you really enjoyed capstone and would love to do it again, but we're going to do lots of analysis work to get you looking like this. Okay. What? That was not a joke, Tracy. A true story. Okay. That's fair. And just if you're tracking here, the thing over on the right, which Sue, you had asked about a few minutes ago and a couple of you commented on, that's really the chart you have, Sue, flipped on the other axis. Do you see that? Are you with me here? Actually, both of those combined are the chart you have flipped on the other axis, I should say. And yeah, it is not that useful. It's a hard tool to use. Okay, I will point out one thing while I have this thing open though, and that is what is the least surprising thing to me possible, which is that we do see a gap for students who and the reason for this is because the vast majority of my students come from either a mutual funds background or have no investment license at all. And unfortunately, neither of those things prepare you well for the type of investment questions you'll see on this exam. And that's, Olu, your point here is exactly right. Okay. And it's not even just the subject matter that's difficult. It's that the answers aren't necessarily obvious. This is actually closer. Who made the crack about CFA before? Kevin, that was you, right? This is closer to stuff that would be useful to have gone through the CFA curriculum for. Okay. This is where you're going to have some derivatives questions. You're going to have more challenging asset allocation questions. You're going to have questions that deal with sort of client scenarios versus model portfolio. Okay, there's lots here, and a lot of it is really only going to work well if you show up to the exam with a good toolkit for those questions. Okay. What do you mean by ratios here, Craig? Like PE? Yeah, you could. Yeah. Yeah, I can buy that. So yeah, we might see sharpen trainer. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fair, Craig. Yeah. Okay. Any questions so far? Not much, Shauna. Not much. Hardly anything, actually. Um, and it is listed in that document I showed you before. So what you can bring, you bring your ID, you bring your admission ticket, you bring your calculator, bring a pencil and eraser. It's not a bubble exam. You don't have to have like the number 2 pencil or whatever, but you want something to write with. You can bring water in a clear bottle. So you're supposed to be provided, Brian. Yes, and you know how I feel about earplugs, that this is a good thing to bring even if you don't like wearing them, just in case you get the clacky keyboard beside you or the person with a perpetual sniffle. I imagine we'll just be gunning that person down in public by then anyways, but whatever. Yeah, we're going to talk about that too, Judy. Normally, a low collection score means that you have not read the question thoroughly and probably overlooked some client details in the question. That's normally what it means. Okay. But yes, if you know that you have a low collection score, it's good to focus on that. And I'll show you some places where we can pick up on that. Okay, so yeah, you should be provided with earplugs. Now, you'll get your case study booklet. I don't know what they're going to do about scrap paper. Okay, the last exam had no scrap paper, which I am not a fan of. I hope those of you who wrote the last exam, if this caused you a problem, that you identified it. So I don't know. I think that that's better than most got, Craig. Okay, they were supposed to have no scrap paper on the exam. So if you got one piece, be grateful. Yeah, that's what, and I don't understand that, Stuart. I have no clue why that was a measure that was implemented. I hope that, like, whatever, we can talk about it here, but what I really need you to do is to tell FP Canada that that was a problem. Okay, that's good. Yes, you got to tell them. Okay. Yeah, and again, Sue, you got to tell FP Canada. That's good, useful feedback, but if there's no no complaints to FP Canada, then we have an issue. They're just going to do the same thing over again. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's perfect, Stuart. That's what I'm hoping for. Now, there are some additions to this list. So if you have a medical exemption, then you can bring food in with you and maybe other devices if there's something else you need to be able to read or whatever the case is. There are other. Well, I know that's not even true, Craig. Huh. Okay. I mean, Stuart literally just said he talked about it. So I wonder, send me that email, Craig. I'd love to see it. So just for what it's worth, I generally am very much a fan of FP Canada. I think they do a great job, and I'm happy to have my proverbial uh, cart hitched to their horse. However, occasionally I get into a little back and forth, and it's nice to be able to support my position with other evidence. Okay. All right. Sorry, Sue, was it you that asked what you can bring with you? Was there something you're thinking in particular here? Oh, sorry, Sue, I apologize. I can't remember who it was, and the chat box is so full I can't even really. Oh, definitely not, Shauna. No, you can definitely not bring a formula sheet. Now, they do provide you with a formula sheet, but it's useless. Okay. Yeah, the formula sheet only has the, I can show it to you here. It only has the longhand formulas for time value of money. Right there. That's the formula sheet you get on the exam. Okay. So if you want to do the longhand formulas for time value of money, go to town. And the one formula on here that is marginally useful is the real rate of return formula. Okay. All right. Yes, it is useless, Olu. Yeah. Okay. What I'd like to do there is take a 15-minute break. I want you to think about any questions you have while we're on the break. And after a 15-minute break, we're going to come back and work through a question together. We're going to work through one question together. I'm going to show you how I would approach the question and some of what we can learn from working through a question. Okay, so I have 1 minute past the hour. We'll take a 15-minute break. And we'll resume then at 16 minutes past, now 17 minutes past, at least Microsoft time, 17 minutes past. We'll see you back then. Thanks.